in a quiet reserve tucked deep in Texas. A wild Mustang known only by the number 418, cowered in silence, unreachable, unrideable, and unclaimed. But when a woman with her own unspoken grief sat by his pen day after day, and a broken soldier came searching for a ghost of his past, something extraordinary happened. This isn't just a story about a horse. It's about healing, memory, and a bond that defied every expectation. The Texas Panhandle was dry that summer. The sky above Dry Hollow Reserve stretched wide and pale, a canvas of bleached blue barely touched by clouds. Wind dragged red dust across the empty paddocks like memories trying to settle where no one wanted to remember. The land itself felt silent, not peaceful, but holding its breath. Harper Ellison had learned to move through silence. She wasn't born that way, but over time it had become the only language she trusted. She stood at the edge of Corral 13, arms folded loosely, worn denim jacket hanging off her shoulders like it didn't quite belong. The clipboard tucked under her arm was more ritual than necessity. She hadn't written anything on it in days. Her gaze fixed on the far back corner of the pen, where a ghost in the shape of a horse hunched against the boards. Mustang number 418, male, estimated 10 years old, recovered near Palo Duro Canyon after a federal roundup gone sideways. Malnourished, mistrustful, unapproachable, the volunteers had given him a name, Shiloh. Because in 3 weeks of observation, the animal hadn't made a single sound. He didn't rear, didn't bite, didn't pace. He simply folded into the shadows, flanks drawn tight against bone, like a creature trying to become invisible. Harper didn't call out, didn't approach. She just stood there, quiet as dusk. Somewhere behind her, an old windmill creaked in rhythm with the wind. Farther out, the bleat of a goat echoed from the barn. She listened, not because she was waiting for anything, but because the sounds helped her stay present. That was something she was still learning to do. She lowered herself to the ground, cross-legged in the dirt, a few feet outside the fence. She didn't glance at the horse again. Instead, she opened a leather-bound journal, its corners frayed from too many years of holding things she couldn't say aloud. She wrote, Day 16. He still won't look at me. I think he sees me, but that's different. He turns away the moment I exhale too loudly. There's a kind of knowing in that, like he understands noise is dangerous. She paused, then added, Sometimes I think he recognizes something in me, or maybe I just need to believe that. She closed the journal and leaned her head back against the fence post, eyes slipping shut. Her breaths were slow, controlled, like she was borrowing calm from the dust and sun. There was a time not so long ago when people whispered her name like a prayer. Harper Ellison, the trauma nurse who pulled 6 students out of a burning classroom after the Northern Arizona shooting. The one who ran back inside for her brother, Evan, and didn't make it out with him. They gave her medals, letters, counselors. But what they couldn't give her was Evan. So she left the hospital, sold the house, and moved north, taking a job nobody wanted. Behavior rehabilitation specialist at a government-run Mustang sanctuary. Most thought she was wasting her license. Harper thought she was finally breathing. That was 4 months ago. The sound of hooves shifting brought her back. A quiet thump. She didn't look. Behind her, Shiloh had moved, barely. Just enough to unpin himself from the corner, his ribs showing through the thin stretch of hide. One of his ears twitched. It wasn't progress. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. Harper rose slowly, brushing dust from her jeans. She turned to walk back toward the main trailer, her shadow long in the gold of late afternoon. Then she stopped, froze. Behind her, the horse had lifted his head. His eyes found her, just for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of stillness that cracked something inside her she didn't know was still waiting to be broken. She didn't smile, didn't cry. but when she reached the trailer and closed the door behind her, she leaned against it a long moment, hand resting over her heart, like she was holding a name that hadn't been spoken in years. That night she sat at her desk flipping through the intake documents again. Shiloh's file was thin. Too thin. No brand, no microchip, no photo of his capture. Just GPS coordinates and a signature that looked like it had been written by someone in a hurry to forget. She wrote one more line in her journal. "I think silence is how survivors speak." Then she closed the book. Outside, the wind blew dust across the paddocks again, and in Coral 13, the ghost horse watched the dark for the first time. Mornings in Dry Hollow came slow, like the land was reluctant to wake. Harper liked that. It gave her time to ease into each day without jarring alarms or crowded sidewalks. Out here, nothing demanded attention except the wind and the occasional creak of fence boards stretching under the sun. Shiloh still hadn't let her touch him, but he no longer turned away. That, in Harper's quiet language of grief and grace, was a beginning. She walked the same path every day. Coffee mug in hand, boots crunching over gravel, clipboard under her arm, though she rarely used it. The sun was already lifting over the horizon, painting the sky with a soft orange blush that barely warmed the chill of Texas dawn. Corral 13 looked the same as always. Shiloh stood in his usual spot, not tucked as tightly into the corner, but still hovering on the edge of his own world. His ribs no longer looked like they'd split his hide, thanks to slow, steady feeding and time. Harper didn't speak when she arrived, not yet. She sat down cross-legged outside the fence and took a slow sip from her mug. She watched him, and he watched everything but her. "Did you know," she finally said, voice barely louder than the wind, "that the oldest wild horse fossil ever found was in Wyoming? They say horses originated here. Not in Europe. Here." Shiloh's ear flicked. "That's funny to me," she continued, "how something can belong somewhere and still be treated like it doesn't." She pulled out her journal, thumbed through pages, then didn't write, just held it in her lap. "I lied to my mom for years, told her Evan didn't suffer. But the truth is—" She took a deep breath, eyes on the Mustang. "I don't know. I don't know if he screamed. I don't know if he saw me. All I know is I didn't get to him in time." Shiloh didn't move, but his stance shifted. Subtle, one hoof slightly forward. His shoulder lowered, like he was no longer bracing for a fight. Harper exhaled slowly. "I kept thinking if I saved more people, it'd bring him back. It never did. So I stopped saving people." She glanced down, started saving horses instead. The Mustang blinked. Nothing more, but that blink held no fear, no retreat. That was something. A shadow crossed the corral gate behind her. "Am I interrupting something?" Harper turned. Wes Lockhart leaned against the post, Federal Ranger badge catching the sun. He wore his usual uniform dusty khaki, a brimmed hat tilted low, and his gaze was half amusement, half calculation. "You're early," Harper said. "You're talking to ghosts out loud again. Figured I'd better check for signs of heat stroke." She didn't laugh, but a corner of her mouth tugged upward. Wes climbed up to sit on the rail. His boots hung casually over the inside of the corral, though he stayed out of Shiloh's reach. "I've been going through the intake logs again," he said, thumbing through a leather-bound folder. "Something doesn't sit right." "With what?" "Mustang number 418. Your boy there." He nodded at Shiloh. "His file says he was picked up outside the Lubbock line, GPS coordinates logged by a contract wrangler, Travis McNair." Harper went still. "Problem is," Wes continued, "I ran the chip scan myself yesterday. That tag's bouncing back to a different pickup site, almost 70 miles northeast." "You think it's a typo?" she asked. "I think McNair's been dirty before," Wes replied. "He's under quiet investigation for smuggling Mustangs out of holding to sell on foreign tracks. There's talk of Qatar, Dubai, anywhere with money, and no questions asked." Harper's eyes flicked toward Shiloh. "Why would he mark this one for slaughter?" she asked quietly. "He doesn't have the build for racing. Too old, too lean." "Could have been miscategorized," Wes said. "Or maybe this one wasn't meant to be found at all." Harper stood slowly, dusting her jeans. "I'm not letting you take him," she said, calm but firm. "I haven't said I was," Wes replied, holding her gaze. They stood in the sunlight, the Mustang between them, silent. "I know what he is to you," Wes added. "I see it." Harper's voice softened. "He's not a case file. He's not a witness. He's a survivor." Shiloh stepped forward. One step, slow, deliberate, 3 meters now. Close enough that Harper could see the glint in his eyes. Not fear. Something else. Something almost inquisitive. Her breath caught. She didn't move. Shiloh stopped. Didn't retreat. Didn't tremble. Harper's heart thudded in her ears. "That's the first time," she whispered. He's never moved toward me before." Wes didn't say anything. He just watched, like something sacred was unfolding in front of him. Harper dropped slowly to one knee, her movement smooth, unthreatening. She didn't reach out, didn't even blink. Shiloh lowered his head slightly. Not quite submission, not quite trust, but not nothing. Harper's eyes welled. Her voice broke when she said, "Thank you." Behind her, Wes gave a low whistle. "Damn. I'll be." They stood in silence for a moment more. Then Wes cleared his throat. "I'll keep digging on McNair, but if this horse is what I think he is, you might be sitting on something bigger than a recovery project." "I'm not sitting on anything," Harper said. "I'm standing beside him." Wes gave a small nod. "Fair enough." As he turned to go, Harper looked down at her journal again. She wrote, "Today he stepped forward. Not far, but enough. Sometimes that's what healing looks like." She closed the book and looked up. Shiloh was still watching her, and for the first time, Harper felt seen. The wind that morning carried dust and secrets. It whispered through the cedar brakes and rolled over the hills like an old tune someone forgot the words to. Harper felt it in her chest before she even stepped out the door. A weight. A hush. Like something was about to shift. She stood at the fence line of Corral 13, coffee untouched, boots muddy, eyes fixed on Shiloh. He was calm, grazing in the soft dirt, but there was a new stillness to him. Not the frozen terror of before. This was something quieter, like a truce. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. They'd found a rhythm Harper with her journal and long silences, Shiloh with his watchful eyes and tiny, hard-earned movements. She had just scribbled something about the sky when she heard the crunch of tires. A truck. Old, loud, familiar in the way certain storms are. She turned. The GMC rolled up slow, belching smoke, the kind of engine sound that rattled your bones. Faded green paint, bumper wired together, headlights fogged like tired eyes. It coughed to a stop by the side gate. A man stepped out, late 60s, maybe older, tall but stooped, flannel shirt with one button missing. Jeans, soft with wear. He had a gait that favored the right knee and a hand that trembled slightly when he pulled off his hat. His eyes weren't looking at Harper. They were locked on the horse. Harper crossed her arms, not unfriendly. "Can I help you?" The man took one step forward, then another. He didn't answer right away. "It's him," he said finally, voice rough as gravel. Harper's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry." "That's Shadow," the man said, nodding toward Shiloh. "I'd know that gait anywhere. Left hind swings wide, half a beat behind. He always did that, even after we rehabbed the ligament." Shiloh had stopped grazing. He was looking at the man now, not spooked, curious. Harper felt a chill rise up her spine. "What's your name, sir?" "Keaton," he replied. "Eli Keaton. I think your horse used to belong to my son." Inside the barn, Harper poured 2 coffees. Eli sat across from her on an overturned grain bucket, hands wrapped around the cup like it was the only warm thing he had left. "My boy's name was Jace," Eli began. "Marines, 2 tours in Iraq, came home a ghost. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit in a room without a window behind him. Every loud noise made him flinch." Harper didn't interrupt. She knew the type. She had patched too many like him. Some walked out of her care. Some didn't. "He started working on ranches," Eli continued. "Said it helped to be around animals. Said they didn't lie. Then he got Shadow. Rescued him from a kill pen outside Amarillo. That horse." He pulled Jace back from the edge. Harper looked down at her mug. "What happened?" 3 years ago, lightning hit the barn. Fire moved fast. Jace tried to get Shadow out. Got him loose. "But my son." "He went back for the damn saddle. He didn't want it to burn. It was my father's." Eli's eyes turned glassy. "Roof collapsed. Jace got out. Barely. Face burned. Lost his voice. PTSD got worse. And the horse? Gone," Eli whispered. "We thought he ran off into the canyon. Searched for weeks. Nothing. No body. No sightings. Until—" He looked at her. "Until I saw that intake photo on the Dry Hollow website." Harper was quiet for a long beat. "That horse came in with no name, no ID. Only thing he had was a numbered tag and burns along the back flank." Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn strip of leather, singed, cracked, tied in a loop. "It was around Shadow's neck," he said. "Jace made it from his first pair of service boots. Said it reminded him to stay grounded." Harper took it gently. Shiloh, no, Shadow was at the gate again, watching. She stepped out slowly, leather strip in hand. Eli followed, hesitant. The Mustang stood still as she approached. His ears flicked, his eyes trained on the man behind her. "Easy," Harper whispered. She held out the strip. Eli took it. Walked the last few steps alone. Shiloh sniffed. 1 breath, 2. And then he pushed his head forward, nudging into Eli's chest. The old man staggered, knees buckling. He fell to the dirt, both arms wrapped around the horse's neck, weeping. "I don't need DNA," he whispered. "I just needed to see those eyes again." Harper felt her throat tighten. It was him. It had always been him. Later they sat in the barn again, Harper now on the grain bucket. "I didn't come here to take him," Eli said. "I just needed to know." "He's not ready to go anywhere," Harper replied. "I'm not sure my son is either," Eli added, voice brittle. "Jace doesn't talk much, not since the fire, barely leaves the shop." Harper hesitated. Then, "Bring him." Eli blinked. "If that horse is part of him," she said, "then maybe this is where he needs to come, not the other way around." Outside, Shiloh's shadow was moving again, not just standing, pacing the fence line, lifting his head, testing the wind like he remembered something he'd forgotten, something like home. Harper scribbled in her journal that night. "He has a name now, one that someone loved, one that someone mourned. Shadow. And for the first time, I wonder if maybe naming the things we've lost is the only way we bring them back." The morning sun spilled over Dry Hollow like warm syrup, coating the pastures in soft gold. Everything looked peaceful, like it had always belonged to silence. But Harper Ellison knew better. Peace wasn't what happened outside you, it was what you had to fight for inside. She had spent most of the night sitting outside Shiloh's paddock. No, not Shiloh. Oh. Shadow. The name felt strange in her mouth at first, but it grew more familiar the more she said it in her head. He had a story now, a history. A tether back to a boy who needed him, and today that boy was coming. Jace Keaton. Harper had only seen a few old photos Eli showed her before the fire, before the silence. A tall kid with a broad smile and a sparkle in his eye, the kind of person who probably used to talk too fast and think too big. Now? Eli said he hardly spoke at all. Lived mostly in the back of a tractor repair shop he ran with a cousin out near Wichita Falls. Avoided people. Avoided mirrors. But when Harper had looked into Shadow's eyes and seen that flicker, the one that woke up when Eli stood there, she knew. Some part of that old life still lived inside the horse, and if even a sliver of it still lived inside the boy, maybe, just maybe, she'd made a promise. No camera crews, no staff, no pressure, just space and silence. Two things she'd learned could be more healing than all the therapy in the world. Harper stood at the front of the ranch now, waiting by the gate. The sky was pale blue and cloudless, but her palms were damp. The sound of an engine drifted up the gravel road. An old pickup came into view. Dust-colored, no shine, just honest wear. Eli was behind the wheel. And next to him, slumped against the door, was Jace. He didn't look up as the truck pulled in. Didn't move when Eli parked and got out, waving quietly. "Morning," Eli said, voice low. "He didn't sleep much last night." Harper nodded. "I didn't expect him to." Eli came around and opened the passenger door. "Come on, son," he said, voice gentle but firm. Jace didn't answer, but he moved, slowly, like each limb had to be reminded how to exist. He stepped down onto the dirt and stood there, still not meeting anyone's eyes. He wore a dark hoodie pulled low, sleeves pushed over scarred hands. His posture was loose but closed off like he wanted to disappear into his own ribs, his eyes. When Harper finally caught a glimpse, were quiet, not empty, but tired in a way words couldn't fix. Harper didn't speak. She just gave Eli a look, and he nodded. They walked together, slowly, toward the paddock. Shadow was already at the far end of the fence line, head high, ears twitching. He'd been that way since the truck came into view. Restless, expectant, like something he'd been waiting for had just arrived. They stopped about 15 feet from the fence. Harper stepped back. Jace stood still. He didn't speak, didn't reach out, didn't even blink. Harper could feel the tension in his shoulders, in his hands, in the way his jaw locked like stone. His chest rose and fell in shallow, slow movements. And then Shadow moved. Not a charge, not a bolt, just a quiet, deliberate walk. One step, another. The grass crunched softly beneath his hooves. 10 feet, 5. Jace's hands trembled. He pulled something from the pocket of his hoodie. A strip of leather worn, burned along the edges. He held it out. No words. Shadow stopped just in front of him. His ears flicked forward. His nose lowered. He sniffed, paused, and then pressed his forehead gently into Jace's open palm. No one breathed. Jace closed his eyes, and in a voice cracked from rust and grief, he whispered, "Shadow." Eli sank to his knees behind them, hands covering his face. Harper felt her throat close, tears burning at the edges. Shadow stayed there, still, connected. It was a communion, silent and sacred, like two halves of a song finally being played together again. Harper backed away, giving them room. They stood there for minutes. She didn't count how many. Finally, Jace stepped back. Shadow didn't follow. He didn't need to. Jace turned toward Harper, eyes clearer than before. "Thank you," he said. Just that. Then he sat down right there in the dirt, legs crossed, like a kid at story time. Shadow lay down too, not all the way, but enough to rest his weight. They stayed like that until the light changed, until the afternoon shadow stretched long and soft across the pasture. Inside the barn, Harper poured 3 coffees. Eli took his black. Jace took his with too much sugar, but drank it anyway. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Harper found Jace standing by the paddock alone, looking at the stars just beginning to appear. "Do you want to come back?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Every day?" He paused, then looked at her. "If you'll let me." She smiled. "We'd be lucky to have you." He looked back at Shadow, who was dozing peacefully in the straw. "Maybe I need to remember who I was," he said, "and maybe he's the only one who can help me do that." Harper didn't respond. She didn't have to. Some things don't need fixing. They just need returning. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, someone had come home. The days that followed felt like something had cracked open, not in a violent way, but like light pushing through the edge of a long, cold winter. Jace started showing up at Dry Hollow every morning before the sun crested the ridge. He didn't talk much, still kept his hands buried in his hoodie pockets, but he showed up. And Shadow always met him at the gate, ears pricked forward like he'd been waiting all night. Harper watched from a distance, notebook in hand. She didn't write about Shadow anymore. She wrote about Jace, about the way he began to mirror the horse's rhythms, slow steps, soft movements, longer breaths, about how he sat in the same corner of the paddock every afternoon, not to train, not to teach, just to be. Like stillness itself was medicine. It wasn't flashy, wasn't fast, but something was healing. Slowly. And then on a Thursday morning, a box arrived. It was a plain manila container dropped off by a courier from the Bureau of Land Management. No return address, no note, just a sticker on the side that read, "Per request, Mustang 418, Origin Records." Harper took it into her office, a converted tack room with peeling white paint and a flickering desk lamp. She didn't open it right away. Let it sit on the desk like a sleeping bear. Eventually, she poured herself a cup of strong coffee, sat down, and broke the seal. Inside were documents, intake logs, microchip records, transport manifests. She flipped through page after page, scanning for anything familiar. And then she saw it, the name, Travis McNair. Harper froze. McNair had been the one who filed the recovery papers for Mustang 418. According to the records, the horse had been found roaming a dry basin east of Fort Stockton, Texas, 3 years ago. No tags, no brand, no match to any known herd. Died. But something felt off. The coordinates. Harper pulled up the GPS entry listed in the file, 31.8977 DGEN, 102.4037 DGW. She copied the data and punched it into her old laptop. The satellite map loaded slowly, crawling over a familiar patch of desert, and then she saw it. Those coordinates didn't match the BLM's permitted recovery zone, not even close. Instead, they pointed to private land near Palo Duro Canyon, just a few miles from the property Eli had said Shadow and Jace once lived on. Harper's stomach dropped. If Shadow had been found there, he hadn't been wild. He had been someone's, Jace's, and McNair had lied. The door to the tack room creaked open. Wes Lockhart stood there, arms crossed, a dust ring on his badge where he'd wiped off mud. "Got your message," he said. "You said it was urgent?" Harper slid the folder across the table. Wes opened it and scanned the first few pages. His expression shifted from neutral to tight-lipped. "Travis McNair," he muttered. "I haven't heard that name in a while." "You know him?" "Unfortunately," Wes said. "He was let go from a BLM contract 2 years ago. There were rumors, GPS tampering, fraudulent recovery claims, horses going missing, but nothing ever stuck." Harper leaned in. "I think he used falsified coordinates to claim Shadow our Shadow as a wild recovery. I think he took a domesticated Mustang and entered him into the government system as a stray." Wes flipped to the transport manifest. That would explain the inconsistencies. These recovery times are padded. And the intake scan on the chip? It's from a handheld scanner, not a stationary checkpoint. He closed the folder, tapping it against his palm. This isn't just a clerical error. If you're right, this is evidence of fraud and theft. Harper looked toward the paddock, where Jace stood brushing Shadow's neck with slow, careful strokes. "They took him from that boy," she said, "filed him away like a number, like he didn't belong to anybody." Wes sighed. "You know what this means, right? If this horse is part of an open investigation, he's technically—" "He's not a piece of evidence," Harper snapped. "He's not a unit or an asset or a data point. He's a survivor." Wes met her eyes. For a long beat, neither of them spoke. Finally, Wes said, "Okay, then let's prove it." They spent the next 4 hours combing through federal databases, cross-referencing Shadow's microchip ID with other horses logged by McNair. A pattern emerged, dozens of Mustangs with vague origin coordinates, all tagged within a 3-month window and all funneled through a third-party holding facility near San Angelo. And then they found the transfer orders records of select horses being exported overseas to private buyers. Dubai. Qatar, Spain, Shadow was on the list, except something had interrupted that process. A fire. Harper stared at the screen. Her blood turned to ice. "This wasn't just a mistake," she said. "This was a pipeline. He was running an illegal operation under the BLM's nose." Wes nodded grimly. "And Shadow got away." Harper leaned back in her chair, exhaling hard. "We need to bring this forward, file a formal report." Wes hesitated. "If we do that, Harper, Shadow could be taken into custody, temporarily, maybe permanently, until the investigation clears. You ready to risk that?" She stood, eyes burning. "No, I'm not." Wes raised an eyebrow. "But I'm ready to fight like hell if they try." That night, Harper walked the paddock alone. The stars were sharp overhead, a cold wind trailing through the fences like a warning. Shadow stood quietly by the fence, watching her. She stepped close and placed a hand on his neck. "We're not done," she whispered. "They might come for you, but I won't let them erase you again." Shadow flicked an ear. Somewhere behind them, the light in Jace's cabin clicked off. Tomorrow would be a new war. But tonight, they had this. Silence, stars, and the fire in their bones. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of hoof prints, sharp, erratic, and headed in the wrong direction. Harper noticed them just after sunrise. She had gone out early, coffee thermos in hand, expecting another quiet morning of routine chores and Shadow dozing in his usual spot near the sycamores. But instead of peace, she found chaos. The gate to Shadow's paddock was wide open, swinging gently in the wind. A broken padlock hung from the latch, snapped clean. And the horse was gone. She didn't scream, didn't drop her coffee or panic. She just stood there, still as a post, and let her brain catch up. Then she ran. "Wes," she called, sprinting past the bunkhouse. He came out in boots and flannel, barely buttoned. "What's going on?" "He's gone," Harper said. "Shadow, someone opened the gate." Wes was down the steps before she finished. "Tracks?" She nodded. "Headed toward the tree line. Looks fresh, maybe an hour old." Within minutes, the entire reserve was on alert. Volunteers searched the perimeter, called into the canyon, sent drones up over the scrublands. But Harper knew the truth even before the others confirmed it. This wasn't an escape. This was a theft. By noon, the surveillance footage had been reviewed. It was grainy and dark, but clear enough to see a figure in a dark jacket enter the barn just after 3 a.m. He moved with purpose, kept his head down, and wore gloves. Harper recognized the gait instantly. A slight hitch in the left knee. Travis McNair. The name tasted like rust in her mouth. "Son of a," Wes muttered, slamming his fist on the desk. "He came back. After all this time. He came to finish the job," Harper said, "to clean the trail." Eli was the one who thought of the old ridge. Back when Jace was a boy, Eli said, there was a place Shadow would always run to when he got spooked. High ground, western slope, near the broken cedar grove. Jace used to say it was where the wind made the horse feel invisible. Harper turned to Jace. Can you find it? Jace nodded once. He was already lacing his boots. I'll go with you, Harper said, but Jace shook his head. Just me. Harper hesitated. The boy she first met weeks ago wouldn't have been able to walk into a forest alone, let alone after the animal he loved. But this wasn't the same boy. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Then, bring him home. Jace didn't respond. He just slipped into the trees and disappeared like a shadow himself. Meanwhile, Harper and Wes followed the truck tracks west. The tire treads were fresh, but inconsistent. McNair had doubled back, tried to throw off pursuit. Wes drove while Harper scanned the woods with binoculars, every branch a possible ambush. They didn't have long to wait. At the base of a steep incline near the south fence, they found McNair's truck still running, still warm, no horse, no thief. Split up, Wes said, but stay in radio range. Harper nodded and moved uphill. She didn't need long. At the top of the ridge, just below a wind-bent tree, she found them. McNair had a rope in his hand and a tranquilizer dart gun tucked into his belt. He wasn't expecting her. Back off, he snapped, eyes wild. That's not your horse, Harper said, voice even. He doesn't belong to anybody, McNair growled. He's a number in a system, a glitch. You think they'll let you keep him when this all gets out? You think you can rewrite what's already been buried? Harper didn't flinch. You buried the wrong thing, Travis. She stepped forward, steady. Behind her, footsteps. Wes appeared, gun drawn but pointed low. McNair froze. And from the trees, a rustle. Then another sound, a low whinny. Shadow stepped into the clearing, flanks heaving, eyes rolling with fear, but ears pinned forward. Harper didn't speak. She didn't have to. Behind Shadow came Jace, breathless, covered in sweat and dirt. He didn't yell, didn't lunge. He just walked forward, slow, hands open. Shadow saw him. The panic drained from the Mustang's body like water from a cracked basin. And then, in the quiet of that standoff, Jace dropped to one knee. He raised his palm, not shaking, not forcing. Shadow came. One step. Then two. Then, with a tremble, he laid his muzzle into Jace's hand and let out a long, aching breath. The kind of sound only made by those who've held in too much for too long. Wes cuffed McNair without a word, dragged him back down the hill and into the truck. But Harper stayed. She crouched beside Jace, watching man and horse breathe in sync. I told you, she whispered, you're not just surviving anymore. Jace didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. They walked back to Dry Hollow in silence, Shadow trailing behind them without a lead, without a halter. Just trust. The sun was setting as they crossed the final fence line. The whole reserve lit up in orange and gold, as if the land itself was breathing again. Volunteers gathered near the barn. Eli stepped forward, tears wetting the edge of his beard. Harper met his gaze. He's home. Later that night, when the barn was quiet and everyone had gone, Harper found Jace outside Shadow's stall. He was holding the burnt leather strap again. She's still trying to claim him, he said, voice barely a whisper. The system, the news, all of it. Harper nodded. Then we'll take him somewhere it can't reach. Jace looked up. Where? She smiled gently. To a place where freedom doesn't have a fence. The morning came quietly to Dry Hollow Reserve, wrapped in a soft veil of late October mist. The air held a certain weight, like the hush before something meaningful, before the shift you feel in your bones, rather than see with your eyes. Harper stood by the fence line, arms crossed, watching, as Shadow once called, Shiloh moved slowly across the pasture. He was different now, not fully healed, not by a long stretch, but different. His ribs still showed in the right light. And there were days his left hind leg trembled slightly when he trotted, but his eyes no longer darted. His ears no longer flattened with every approach. He had stopped hiding in corners, and so had she. Across the yard, Jace sat on the back step of the barn, his elbows on his knees, that worn leather strap wrapped loosely around his fingers like a rosary. He didn't speak much these days, but the silence no longer choked him. Now it was something else, something like peace, or maybe the beginning of it. They had survived the storm. Now they had to decide what came after. The media hadn't taken long. Once the footage of Shadow reuniting with Jace hit the agency network, the phones lit up. News vans came rolling in like a parade no one invited. They parked just outside the gates, hovering like vultures, waiting for a quote, a statement, a pose. "America loves a redemption arc," Wes had muttered, arms crossed as he watched the first satellite dish go up. "They'll chew this story and spit it out before next week." He wasn't wrong. The reporters called it a miracle. The Mustang that remembered. Some dubbed Jace the horse whisperer who spoke without words. Harper hated every headline. So did Jace. By the third day, Shadow had started pacing again. He backed into corners, flinched at the click of camera shutters. The hollow was becoming a stage, and he was being forced to relive his pain for the entertainment of strangers. Harper knew what had to be done. That night she knocked on Jace's door. He opened it without a word. The television was off. The room was dim. He had unplugged the landline. "I found a place," she said simply. "In Wyoming, Wind River Valley, private land, protected. No roads, no tourists, just grass, water, and sky." Jace looked at her, eyes wary. "It's not a sanctuary," she added. "It's freedom, for real this time." He didn't answer at first. Just sat on the edge of the bed, turning the strap between his hands like it held the answer. Then he shook his head. "If I let him go?" He whispered. "What do I have left?" Harper stepped closer. "You'll still have him, just not behind a fence." His jaw clenched. "You said once," she continued softly, "that Shadow was the only thing that kept you alive. But you kept him alive too. You saved him, Jace. You brought him home. But maybe he doesn't need home anymore. Maybe he needs horizon." He nodded slowly. Then after a long pause, "But I won't send him away." "You won't," she agreed. "We'll go together." 3 days later they left at dawn. Eli packed sandwiches. Wes handed over the last vet paperwork with a look that said more than any speech could. Volunteers lined the driveway, watching as the old pickup rumbled forward, trailer behind. Inside, Shadow stood calm, swaying gently with each turn. Harper drove the first leg. Jace sat passenger, silent, but not withdrawn. On the rearview mirror, the old leather strap dangled, swinging slightly with every bump. It was tied with a fisherman's knot, tight and careful. It looked like it had always belonged there. They reached Wind River Valley on the second evening golden hour, bleeding across the land like fire over parchment. The reserve's owner, an elderly woman named Mabel Kane, met them at the gate. She didn't speak much either, just nodded once, opened the gate, and let them in. No signs, no cameras, just space. And silence. The trailer opened slowly. Jace stood at the ramp, hand extended. Shadow didn't bolt. He walked, slow and curious, step by cautious step, until his hooves touched the earth of Wind River. He paused, nostrils flaring, then raised his head high, and ran. It was not a panicked run, not the desperate bolt of a trapped animal. It was a run of choice. He galloped across the meadow, tail flying like a banner, muscles stretching beneath his scarred hide. In the distance, a small herd of wild mustangs turned to look, ears forward, and then They moved to meet him. Harper held her breath. Jace didn't speak, but his eyes never left that silver blur. Shadow stopped at the crest of a hill. For one long moment he looked back, straight at Jace. Then he threw his head, whinnied once loud and long, and disappeared into the herd. Gone, but not lost. Jace let out a breath that had lived in his lungs for 3 years. Harper stood beside him, quiet. "I think," he said finally, voice hoarse, "he forgave me." Harper looked at him. "I think," she said, "you forgave yourself." They stayed there a while, didn't need to talk, just watched the wind move through the valley. Weeks later, a package arrived at Dry Hollow. No return address, just a single word on the card: home. Inside was the leather strap frayed, burned but still whole, and beside it a photo. Shadow standing tall on the ridge, mane wild, a foal nestled beside him. New beginnings. Wes tacked the photo to the barn wall. Volunteers paused to stare every now and then. But no one ever asked to see the horse again. They just knew. Freedom didn't need a camera. It only needed someone to believe that healing wasn't about erasing scars, but letting them breathe under open sky. If this story moved you even a little, leave a simple 1 in the comments. It's our quiet way of saying, "I felt that too." And if you're still thinking about that moment in the field, you're not alone. Subscribe to True Animal Stories so you won't miss the next journey. Because out here, every hoofprint carries a truth, and every silent bond tells a story worth remembering. We'll see you in the next one. In the